Okay, more whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I am, I guess, opening the meeting and welcoming everybody to our 2021 annual member meeting. It's via Zoom because here we are and still in the middle of a global health crisis. And I just thought I'd take a few minutes to say a few thank yous and to recap last year and make sure everybody is um, well aware of all of the things we accomplished last year in light of the craziness that ensued with our global pandemic. Um, so I'd like to start out by saying one of the things that I'm aware about from last year is that many organizations and the people behind them have taken on heightened roles for the benefit of everyone in their communities over the last year. And I feel like at the Marblehead Museum, we definitely exemplified this effort. We extended ourselves beyond our original mission of preserving and protecting the past by really jumping in last year to help out our community. And I feel like this sentiment is really actively personified by my predecessor, Jack Attridge, who served ably as president of the Marblehead Museum for many years. And without doubt, it was due to Jack's efforts as far as leadership and guidance is concerned that made it able for us at the museum able to withstand all the operational and financial stressors that we had last year. So I can't thank Jack enough for everything he did to put us in a really good position to be able to withstand a pretty massive, unexpected storm. Um, so many thanks to you, Jack, and we appreciate everything you do for the museum. So that's my first big thank you. Another thank you goes to the endowment committee, to Alex Case, who has ably taken over from TJ Fitzgerald. The whole entire endowment committee really walked us through the year. And between precise budget management and two PPE loans that we shepherded through, one has already been forgiven as a side note, the other one will be forgiven. We really were able to stay away from dipping into our endowment funds in 2020, and that's pretty remarkable. So that puts us on very solid footing starting off in 2021. And I don't think we could be in better shape under the circumstances. So that's a tremendous thank you to everybody involved who helped us to stay on our feet financially. The other thing I want to talk about is just maybe a year at a glance after we shut down in mid-March. It was when we were starting the state mandated quarantine early last spring. We really did adapt to a new normal in very large part thanks to our beloved executive director, Lauren. Lauren was on it from the beginning when it came to the early potential spread of COVID. And I was so impressed by how quickly she could pivot. And she really did work tirelessly. I mean, tirelessly to keep staff and volunteers safe. Simultaneously, she was moving the museum's spring calendar of events to an online platform. None of this was easy. It was overwhelming, and she did it with so much grace under pressure. So millions of thanks to Lauren. We could not have made it through without her, and we could not have made it through without Amy Durbin as well, because this shift was so difficult to execute, and it really did go off pretty flawlessly. In only a matter of days, thanks to Amy, the museum was up and running with virtual programming, and the workshops continued, and lectures were streaming in like they are tonight in living rooms all over the US and as far away as Italy, which is kind of amazing. So if there was one silver lining to the pandemic, I really think it is that technology has allowed the museum's offerings to be seen by a wider and more diverse audience. And I think we've learned a lot from that, and we are going to be able to spread awareness for the museum, even further in the future. So let's see, when we got to phase 3 of the reopening during the summer, Lauren and her staff developed a state approved protocol that allowed for tours of the Lee Mansion throughout the summer and the fall. And these took place and were very well received by all attendees, and they kept going until we closed the mansion in the fall. And I think that was so important to be able to do. We also, if you back up to late spring, really put in an effort to support the town by using our outdoor space more than usual for gatherings. We offered discounted events to small businesses. North Shore Children's Theater used the Lee Mansion Gardens. It was a safe meetup site for Marblehead parenting. There were one-on-one music lessons I saw there, group yoga classes. And then towards the end of the summer, we pulled together the Great Marblehead Tag and Treasure Sale. It was a fundraiser that was proceeds for the museum as well as the Marblehead Food Pantry. And that was a nice goodwill gesture for the community. In the fall, as the weather, deteriorated a little bit, we still had good opportunities in the outdoor space. And one of the highlights of the year was capacity attendance for this incredible Indigenous Peoples Day celebration, which had people lined up around the block to check it out. That was incredible. And there was also a fall festival co-sponsored with Discover Marblehead, where local vendors were able to showcase and sell their unique products and services. And that too was, busy, and people were very supportive of local vendors. And it felt really great to have the community out and about supporting each other. And then we kept going along those lines with an outdoor version for the first time ever of the Gingerbread Festival. And we pulled that off. And we also established a new holiday fundraiser, the Wonderland of Wreaths, courtesy of Amy Durbin, who really pulled the whole thing together. The event was encouraging local artists and retailers to design one-of-a-kind wreaths that were auctioned off with proceeds to benefit the museum. The wreaths, many of you probably saw them, were on display at 170 for the first 2 weeks in December. And Amy did a great job of using social media and other media to boost, visibility for the event, and to focus and highlight the designers. And that was really wonderful because it was a win-win for everybody. So I would say between that new fundraiser, a very successful annual appeal, really good and tight budget review, we were able to reach our year-end financial goals, which during a very challenging year is really quite remarkable. And it is thanks to everybody who was involved with the museum. Lastly, and I think one of the nicest things we were able to do, thanks to generous donations from several museum patrons, the Lee Mansion at Christmas time was beautifully decorated with those gorgeous garlands, an enormous wreath, lights for the first time in many, many years. And it just really was beautiful. And it was simple elegance, is like the way Lauren and I like to describe it. And perhaps like the best symbol of how the museum tried to elevate its profile and be like a center point for the community during a time when we all needed a little bit more holiday cheer. So to our benefactors who really, put us over the top with that beautiful display, I think it made a big difference and gave people a lot of holiday cheer at a time when we all needed it. So that's pretty much the end of my remarks. It was really just super important that if we all had to stay close to home this year, we made sure that the museum could be an important place of culture and comfort for our town and for the people who live here. And we were resilient because of our executive director, of our board members, our volunteers, the garden club, docents, office staff. I mean, I don't know who I'm forgetting, but everybody pitched in here, and it really did make a difference. And at the end of the day, we hope things are better in 2021, but it really is a heartfelt thanks for me on behalf of the entire board that we were able to get through quite a year, and we could not have done it without everybody's involvement. And we are looking forward to better days ahead and more exciting programming and opportunities for everybody at the museum. So that's it. And thank you everybody for being here tonight and for sticking around to listen to the lecture.
Thank you. And then I'm going to hand it over to Patty Peterson, our Vice President and Chair of the Nominating Committee.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Maura. And I just want to note that my Wi-Fi is a little bit shaky here from out of state. So if I cut out, I know I have my back with Kim to continue on, but here we go. The nominating committee's recommendation for a vote by the membership, not including board members, is to elect the following officers to serve a 3-year term. Maura Phelan as president, Patty Peterson, vice president, Pat Lozier as treasurer, Kim Downing as recording secretary. Can I have a motion to accept the roster of officers to serve 3-year terms from March 2021 until the 2022 annual meeting?
So moved.
Karen, thank you. Could I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jack. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And the motion passes. Thank you. The nominating committee's first recommendation for a vote by the membership, not including board members, is to elect Karen Rosenberg to a second new 3-year term from March 2021 to 2024. Can I have a motion to accept the new 3-year term for Karen Rosenberg from March 2021 to 2024 annual meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Karen. Could I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jack. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. And the motion passes. Thank you. The nominating committee's second recommendation for a vote by the membership, not including board members, is to elect Libby Moore to her 4th 3-year term from March 2021 to 2024. Can I have a motion to accept the new 3-year term for Libby Moore from March 2021 to 2024?
So moved.
Thank you, Karen. In a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. The motion passes. Thank you very much. The nominations committee third recommendation for a vote by the membership, not including board members, is to elect Bonnie Buckley to a 3-year term from March 2021 to March 2024. Can I have a motion to accept the 3-year term for Bonnie Buckley from March 2021 to 2024?
So moved.
Thank you, Karen. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Jack. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And the motion passes. Thank you very much. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Liz Gill, who is going off of the board for her service over the past 3 years. Now I'll be turning the meeting over to Lauren for her director's report. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Patty. Thank you, everybody. Well, I will be brief, but I do want to echo some of what Maura said. I think This time last year, we were all still in a tizzy. We had no idea what to expect. This was completely out of the blue. I've been in this field for over 20 years, and the only thing that's even come close this past year was right after 9/11. And even that was not the same sort of craziness as this past year has been. And so I have some thank yous that I have to say in public and out loud. And first is certainly to Amy Durbin, because there's no way that we would have been as successful as we have been in the last year without her hard work, her ingenuity, her tech savvy, and her social media abilities. She's really elevated the museum quite a bit in the short time that she's been here, and especially during the pandemic. And of course, I want to thank Maura and Jack as former president of the board, and Maura as current president of the board, for guiding us through this, as well as the rest of the board members and the staff, Susan Rogers, the development associate, Sandy Greenlaw, our membership associate, and Alyssa, our Saturday person who's now working on some curatorial projects as well, Alyssa Grishin. They just, they stayed with us. They kept us moving through. And no matter what came up, they adjusted and we made it work. And our docents, our Lee Mansion docents and our volunteers at 170 and the GAR, again, they're always magnificent, but they really rose to the occasion this past year, and we're so grateful for them. We were able to safely open the mansion and stay open at 170 with their help. And as Maura said, and I can't say it enough, without the dedicated members such as you all, without the dedicated donors and supporters and those who came to our events, we really could not have had the successful year that we did have despite the pandemic. It was really incredible the way you came out to support us. I'm truly, truly grateful to you all. And so as we continue, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we are still in the midst of all this. So we do have a lot on tap for this year, and a lot of it is still on Zoom, but we are planning some in-person events safely. We'll abide, of course, by the state and town regulations, but as we can start to open things up, we want to do that. So for instance, coming up in May, so check this out, we'll be having our, instead of our Marblehead Memories monthly meeting, we're going to be doing a roadshow event. You can make an appointment. It's kind of like Antiques Roadshow, but we are inviting you to bring your own Marblehead ephemera, collectibles, things like that, that you have that you feel like should be preserved for scanning and photography that will go into the Marblehead Memories archive. We want to hear from you if you have a story to tell, to give us an oral history about your experiences in Marblehead. These are all things that we can continue to do. We will, of course, will open the Lee Mansion. We're scheduled as usual for June 1st. Try to get the GAR open this year as well. And I'm very excited to say that we are still planning to move forward with our Marblehead handprints exhibit. This was planned for last year. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the handprints business. We did postpone it a year, but we have a very exciting exhibit opening in June. So that will be great. And what's been amazing about this year that I want to mention is the collaborations that came from everything that was going on, and the ability to move on to Zoom and to still have meetings and conferences and things like that. We've really gotten to work with some amazing people and organizations in town, and I just want to take a moment to recognize some of them. Certainly Discover Marblehead, that helped us with the fall fair, and in December as well. They've been such a wonderful partner, Melissa Stacy and Amy Booker. We're so appreciative to be working with them, and more to come with them this year. And, it wasn't just the pandemic that happened this past year. There were a lot of issues of racial injustice that came up. And we felt very strongly that we had to deal with those, and to realize that we weren't focusing enough on the history of everybody, the diverse history of Marblehead, the really wonderfully diverse history of Marblehead. And whether it was people of color, Native people, poor people, people with disabilities, other minorities, we just recognized how important it was that we focus on those people as well. And so we've been so lucky to work with the Marblehead Racial Justice Team, Lou especially, and the Marblehead Task Force Against Discrimination, working with some amazing individuals in town, as well as the town administrator himself and some Board of Selectmen and some members of the Board of Selectmen and others on these issues. It's really been a pleasure, and it's something I look forward to. And you know, none of that studying these things doesn't negate studying everything. It's just adding to it and really developing a whole or more wholesome picture of this amazing town. So again, thank you all for your support, and I appreciate your joining us tonight and at all the events that we have. All right, and so now moving on to the next part of this evening, before we get to the lecture, we have a special event that I want to take myself off spotlight. And here we go. So some of you may recall from 2018 when we had our gala event in the Lee Mansion Garden, we presented Betty Hunt with the first, what we called the Betty Hunt Preservation Award. And that was an award that was to honor her and her work to preserve the history of Marblehead. And it was something, as we mentioned then, that we would give out on occasion to organizations, to people who have done just amazing work to help save the history of this town. And so this evening, we are presenting the Betty Hunt Award to the Fort Sewall Oversight Committee. As many of you know, the Oversight Committee is appointed by the Board of Selectmen, or was appointed by the Board of Selectmen, to develop and update a master plan for the restoration of Fort Sewall, and then to oversee the fort's continued restoration project. Now, the fort is a public park. It's 2.5 acres. We all love it. We all love walking our dogs and walking around and, you know, sitting on the benches and spending time looking around. And they have just been amazing. The amount of research, the amount of care that they've taken to get all the details right and to make the fort accessible to people, to interpret the history. Just to watch what they've done over the past couple of years has really been a privilege. And I want to mention the folks on the committee. We have the chairman, Larry Sands of the Glover's Regiment, Rebecca Curran-Cutting, our town planner, Judy Anderson, an at-large member, Ed Lang from the Disabilities Commission, the representative from the Disabilities Commission, Charles Gessner, the OMIA representative, Peter James of the Recreation and Park Superintendent, Karen Jancy, who's also a member, and Christine Nuccio, a member of the Oversight Committee. So on behalf of the Marblehead Museum and Betty Hunt, who doesn't do Zoom, but wholeheartedly agreed with the decision of the museum to present the award, we would like to present the award to the Fort Sewall Oversight Commission. And if Larry could say something so he pops up on your screen, that would be great. Say hi, Larry.
Hi, thank you so much.
There you are.
Here's the award. It's amazing how these things can be transmitted virtually in the age of Zoom. But we can't thank you enough for recognizing us for the work that's been done. And it's taken several years. You mentioned the folks that are on the committee. This has been a perfect example of a public-private partnership. We've raised a lot of money from generous donors here in town, over $725,000 in private donations, over $200,000 in grants, and $750,000 from the generous voters of the town of Marblehead via a debt exclusion override. So that money has done a lot of wonderful things at the fort. We're anxious to reopen, and our hope is that we'll be open for the public by Memorial Day this year. We are planning a big celebration that'll coincide with the 100th anniversary of the return of the fort to the town. That is in 2022. So, given COVID and everything else, it's beneficial, I think, to wait a little while before we get together, but we don't want to delay opening the fort. We want people to be able to enjoy the treasure that we have. I will take 1 second to thank a couple of other folks. So you mentioned our committee. I know we have an architectural firm that's done a tremendous amount of work. The company is called McGinley Calso Associates. And we've worked with Wendell Calso, who was one of the owners, and with Eric Christensen. And I know Eric has joined us tonight, but it's through their diligence that we came up with a coherent plan. We also have had tremendous work from Naomi Cottrell, from Crowley Cottrell, who's landscape architects. They've helped us tremendously with the landscaping. And the contractor is Shaba Construction, and Eddie Shaba and Darren Chevalier have bent over backwards to make the fort perfect. And I'm anxious for everyone to have a chance to walk around. And Lauren, I just want to thank you and the museum for recognizing us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry. We're so excited and cannot wait to be able to walk around again. Let's see. So let me send it over to Maura for other business.
Well, yes, that's, we're nearing our 7 p.m. hour, but we do have a little bit of time to see if there's any other business anybody wants to bring to the table. Otherwise, we will move to adjourn and start our lecture at 7 p.m. So does anybody want to bring anything up? We have, I think, Lauren, you put in the chat link a copy of the report, the annual report, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me. I meant to say that earlier. I did. If you scroll up in the chat link, so if you put your cursor over the Zoom screen on your computer or iPad or whatever, and go to chat. If you open the chat box up and scroll up a little bit, you will see the annual report link, which is, it's also on our website if you go to marbleheadmuseum.org.
Exactly. So that covers a lot of my remarks that I made tonight, as well as lots of other details associated with our financials. Again, many thanks to everybody who was involved with the museum over last year. And like Lauren said, we have really good things coming in 2021. And, you know, while there is now light at the end of the tunnel, it really allows for a little bit more optimism about programming. Although I do see someone here in the chat noting that, you know, are we going to keep things going on Zoom? And I think the answer is a resounding yes, because it really does extend our reach. And we've just gotten such a kick out of people coming on to lectures and workshops from all over the US and elsewhere. So we're going to continue to reach out to people all over. And that's been really awesome. So I think with that, and congratulations again on the Fort Sewall project. That is so exciting. I think what I would do is just ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Anybody?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of moving on to our lecture at 7 p.m.? The meeting is adjourned, and I will turn it back over to Lauren to introduce our guest for the evening. And I hope everybody can remain, and thank you again for everything. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully in person as well as online for the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so just a reminder for those of you who just came in that we are recording and live on Facebook. It will take us just a second to get our speaker, Rick,
I'm here.
There you are. All right. So a couple of, while he's getting his screen up, whenever you're ready, Rick, feel free to share your screen. I'll just give you a few notes. We will ask you to stay muted throughout the presentation. Please do put any questions you have, any comments you have for Rick in the chat. And again, you can just put your cursor over the Zoom box and you should see the chat feature on the bottom. And you can put your questions there. Please note that you do have the option once Rick shares his screen, you should see either a blue or a gray bar. It'll either be going around the top or the side. You can click on that bar to give you more full shared screen.
I hope you have the shared screen. Is that?
We don't. We do not yet.
Let me see.
Okay.
Somebody has a dog, I hear.
That'd be me, sorry.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got it now. Here we go.
All right, great. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Rick to you all. Frederick Detwiller is an architect, preservation planner, and author. He has his BA from Princeton in architecture, his master's degree in preservation from Columbia University. He's a principal of New England Landmarks in Georgetown, Massachusetts. He does restoration, preservation, and historic research throughout New England. In 1968, he began in Boston on Faneuil Hall Market's project at Architectural Heritage Incorporated, also F.A. Stahl Associates, architects with James H. Beaulieu, AIA of Salem. He later was historical architect with McGinley Hart and Associates. In 1977, he published his book, Battle and Plunder of Short Hills, New Jersey, 1777. And in 1981, received the Bullfinch Award for Restoration and Preservation. In 1976 and 1989, with wife Ellen Maloney, he produced bicentennial tableaux vivants, Lafayette Nouveau-Chez, which I'm totally messed up the French and I apologize. He's a board member of Governor Shirley Eustace House, Massachusetts Lafayette Society, and the local historical society. Among his recent publications is Monsieur Dubuc, the first French officer to serve the American cause, in the Journal of the American Revolution, 2019. And we are so grateful to have you speaking with us today about the work you've done on Fort Sewall. And you are muted. Rick, you're still muted. Let's see. We still have you muted for some reason here. Oh.
Mute.
There you
Can
go.
hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm on Zoom, but it's somehow the screen share, is that still working or not?
Yes, still see your screen.
Okay, good. So I will go to the slideshow.
Perfect.
I would like to thank you, Lauren and Maura and Larry Sands and Judy Anderson, especially for all the help and cooperation that we've had with this amazing project. I'm flattered that we have such a wide audience via Zoom, even including people from Italy and at least one cat, which I find amusing since I had one just like that, that loved lying down on the computer. I'd like to thank everybody, including the people who funded this research project, the Massachusetts Society of Colonial Wars, the Society of the Cincinnati, and the General Society of Colonial Wars. for funding this project. And if you'll bear with me, it's 375 years condensed into 45 minutes. So if you get a little bit overwhelmed, I'm sorry. We're trying to be as succinct as we can. But I hope you'll enjoy the things that we've learned as much as I have, because it's like eating potato chips. Once you start, you can't stop. So let's begin with Fort Sewall, that early photo that's on the cover there, if you can see it all. It's a very early one from the 1870s, we think, by Frank Cousins, but it shows how treeless the peninsula of Gales Head was in the 18th and 17th and all the way up until the 19th century, where Fort Sewall stood. And if you look closely, you can see a large barn-like structure over here at the left that was J.P. Turner's warehouse, according to the 1872 atlas. Behind it, you have some fish sheds and fish houses and storage sheds. And over to the right, you've got what was on the site of the original barracks, later the Civil War barracks. I believe it's the old barracks moved down here. And behind it to the right, you can just barely make out the front of the bomb proofs of Fort Sewall. So I'd like to continue, but on the lower right, you'll notice there's a Spanish-American War cannon that came from the 1814 gun house. It's now on display at Abbott Hall, but that's emblematic of the last period of activity at Fort Sewall militarily. But it's not unlike the very early guns, as you'll notice when you get further along here. Here is a map that was annotated by Judy Anderson, who I have to thank for all of her help in editing this show and helping with the research. But we've got the several forts, and really the earliest fort in Marblehead on the left-hand side at Naugus Head later became Fort Derby. We're not going to deal with all of these, but you should know that Fort Sewall was part of a complex. There are several forts, little fortifications, batteries, generally earthworks around the harbor. And they're all listed on this little map here that you could scrutinize later on. But here's Gales Head and Fort Sewall, and you can see how important it was for protecting Marblehead Harbor. And on the right is the 1781 map, actually, that by Barracks, that shows this is Marblehead Harbor, Salem Harbor, and Beverly Harbor. And you can see how strategic Fort Sewall would have been for Marblehead Harbor. It's right here. And then it was Marblehead Fort up until around 1800 when it became Fort Sewall. And over here is Salem Fort at the head of Salem Harbor, and that's now Fort Pickering, among others on that side. And Naugus Head over here also had a battery at one time. So we'll continue on with Fort Sewall, which is the focus of our presentation. And the most interesting thing about it is how well documented it is from about 1705 onward. The original fortification was a little battery that was actually in the upper fort area. And I used the 1820s shoreline to illustrate the changing context and actually the context for the changing fort to fit in. And you'll notice as we go along, each time the fort grows a little bit. We found the original of this in the archives in the United Kingdom. It took us at least 6 months to get the original of this drawing, which I've redrawn all to the same scale so that we can trace these forts and how they overlaid on each other. Right here, you see a gun platform behind a relatively thin earthworks wall and what was labeled an old fish house here. And right here is a little magazine, and all connected by a palisade fence with timber gun platforms behind. It was designed by, actually by Redknapp with the help of the major engineer behind it all was the British chief engineer, Wilhelm Romer. But they had a dispute at the time of the fort's design and actually switched horses in midstream. And John Redknapp became the actual designer of this drawing of Fort, what was then Fort Marblehead Fort. And you see this cross section through the gun battery. I've got a detail I'll show you later, but it shows you the timber platform and the timber wall behind. And even here, a timber reinforced embrasure in this wall, which was part timber and part earth, and the old fish house behind it, and the magazine, which was actually had a Gothic arched vault and a timber platform on top of it. You can see the north arrow here. It doesn't align exactly with the present north, so that I think we've got the planet's axis slightly changing over even 300 years. So there is a slight difference in the orientation. Anyhow, all of these items were very well documented, and I'll show you the details. What's another amazing thing is that Fort William and Mary up in Newcastle, New Hampshire was actually designed by Romer at the same time. Colonel Romer was an irascible guy. He was actually fired by Governor Dudley and then replaced with Redknapp because of workmen complaining about his constant cussing. And it was quite an interesting period of time where the governor told the workmen, or actually it was Sewall, the original Samuel Sewall, in his diary was asked to tell the workmen to do what he says, but not take him seriously when it comes to his cussing. At any rate, the stone-supported earth parapet was almost the same as Marblehead. And you see on the left here, the picket fence and the gun embrasures, which are green at the top, and they're apparently covered with turf. But notably also is the great, huge Union Jack, which is a garrison flag designed to show you which side you were on to the ships in the harbors and things. Marblehead Fort in 1705, the details show you the powder vault and the actual key plan, which describes by alphabet all of the different features. There was even a sally port on one side, but the entrance to the fort was actually in the fence down toward the lower parade, which appeared later. But you see the little Gothic vault, and there was even a little ornamental keystone, but you can clearly see the timber in the embrasures and the timber, heavy timber fence and the timber platform, all of which rotted away in about 20 years. So by 1728, Marblehead was requesting again help with their fort to rejuvenate it. But in 1705, the ordinance was one of the more interesting things about the fort. In addition to 7 guns, they had 1 torn old flag. They had 3 barrels of powder, ammunition, and equipment, 4 large and 6 small powder boxes. They had all kinds of empty cartridges, primers, matches, rammers, round shot, and bar shot, which was designed to tear into ships' rigging when they were attacked. And Captain Edward Brattle is the one who had kept the inventory of the contents of the fort. And it wasn't very much used, as historically Marblehead Fort and Fort Sewall were great in their deterrent value. But from March 25th to September 29th, the guns were fired on April 23rd to the Queen's coronation day. And they fired a salute to Captain Gill on June 16th. So they were quite economical in their use of powder. Now you get to see some of the details in that inventory. They talked about the great guns, which is what I used for the title of this. In King Philip's War, the fort was put back in order, and 3 great guns were granted by the General Court to be placed in position. Well, from that inventory, they have the cross section here of the guns, but the guns were described as sakers, demi-culverins, which you can see here. They were very large guns, and they called them great guns because they were close to 10 feet long at that period. And they gradually tended to get slightly shorter. You see down here from that view of the New Hampshire Fort William and Mary by Romer, the same Union Jack that would have been the old one torn old flag at Marblehead. So, you know, and included the 3 barrels of powder, 73 pounds of powder and cartridges, and 4 large and 6 small cartridge boxes. So it was really quite a well outfitted fort in 1705. Then we get to the legend of Agnes Surridge and Sir Henry Frankland, which is really a important part of the story of Marblehead. You know very well, probably most of you, where Agnes Surridge's well is. It was the well of the old Fountain Inn that you see in the lower left corner here. It was built in 1721. This is a view from the Marblehead Museum, which we appreciate. All of their collection is a great resource. But Harry Frankland was Governor Shirley's collector in charge of monetary matters. So he was really overseeing the pecuniary aspects of the fort rebuilding in 1742 or 3. We've got the gentleman at a seaside tavern here, which you'll see in more detail later, but very much looking like Harry Frankland with his punch bowl and his wine glass and his ledger for the captain or the governor, and behind him a seagoing ship. At any rate, the interior of the tavern looked a lot like the Rhode Island sea captains carousing at a tavern in Suriname done by John Greenwood. But you can see these scenes were not always very pastoral. This is quite a wild scene in a tavern of the period. But the fort, along with Marblehead and Cape Ann, endured 2 earthquakes in the 18th century. And it's not generally known, but the 1755 earthquake shook Cape Ann, and Reverend John Barnard, the minister of Salem, concluded that the Earth's surface had shifted below in response to cause the aftershocks felt at the fort as well. And the connection to Agnes Surridge and Sir Harry Frankland is that they, in the November of 1755, were in Lisbon, and Frankland was buried by rubble and rescued by Agnes Surridge, who he promised to marry and eventually did. But what's interesting is that all of this has its start with the Fort Sewall renovation. She went to their estate in Hopkinton after returning from Europe, lived there until 1775, and escaped through Boston as a Tory to return to England, where she died later. We have the fort in that period. The embankments, or the fortress, was reinforced really rather than extended much. The old barracks is shown in the 1794 plan as being right behind the gun platform. So it was very near where the old fish house was. And then the old magazine probably remained, but it was only the upper parade area that had the parapets reinforced. This was done by under the direction of Bastide and Gridley, who were the engineers for Governor Shirley. John Henry Bastide was the chief British engineer, and Gridley was famous later for building the earthworks at Bunker Hill and around Boston. But you'll see that the drawing abilities of these guys was really quite substantial. Governor Shirley's expedition to Louisbourg to take it from the French up in Nova Scotia was the reason that the fort at Marblehead was just repaired rather than rebuilt and extended. They apparently abandoned more extensive plans in order to do the city of Louisbourg, which they captured and rebuilt. And here's Bastide's plan on the upper right and Gridley's plan at the lower left. And we've been able to find a portrait of Gridley down in Newport. They were at all of them, including Shirley, who came to view and appoint places for erecting batteries in Charlestown, Salem, and Marblehead. So they were all here at Salem and Marblehead. But here we have Gridley's Masonic punch bowl that served both Washington and Lafayette at a later period. So these were not unsubstantial people working on the fort. They used 18th century engineer manuals that are entrenching tools shown here in the right-hand thing exhibit, but you've got things called gabions, which you'll see later as late as the Civil War. And these were used to reinforce earthen forts. So you'll see these later on, but these books were sold by Henry Knox, who you know rescued the guns from Ticonderoga and brought them to Boston. And you'll see how similar this cross section through a gun battery in the lower left is to the early section of Marblehead, but you notice that the parapet's much thicker here. And they do have a magazine that's burrowed into the ground behind it. And you see up here at the upper top left, an excavation of a tunnel through a parapet, which was done at the period. And if you've watched Oak Island, you'll see something like this, the remains up there. Here we have the original Province powderhouse that was bought by Shirley in 1741, about the time they were reinforcing Fort Sewall. And then the Marblehead powderhouse, which really used it, I think, as a prototype to build the circular powderhouse out on Green Street in 1755. So this got a powder source well away from the fort that was more secure than the shoreside battery. Here we have some of the armament in 1742 to 75, the type of thing that would have been here. And if you notice the scale on the left, this is 3 feet. So these cannons were close to 9 feet long, some of them. So you can see why they called them great guns, even in 1741. But they also had smaller guns, and a minion was a small caliber gun. And this is one they found off Marblehead Neck a few years back. There's a 4-pound cannonball shot found off Peach's Point that's at Abbott Hall here, was fired by something more on the order of this cannon on the lower right, which is a Dutch cannon from 1647 that was found in Chelsea on Samuel Sprague's land, where there was that Battle of Chelsea Creek. The cannon had split, but it's a 1647 cannon that's probably similar to what was originally in the fort at Marblehead. Here we have the armament again. They had to get these guns to the fort somehow. So you see an ammunition wagon from Muller's Treatise on Artillery. He had several of these manuals. And above it is a gun from the Nancy, which was the famous ship captured by, a munitions ship captured by Captain Manley on the Lee out of Marblehead. And he captured it off Cape Ann, but it was loaded with munitions. We have an entire inventory of it. This one gun was somehow left in Gloucester, but taken by the Rowley militia later, and it's now in Georgetown, which was then West Rowley. It's been installed in the town hall at Georgetown by Ed Desjardins, who's a member of the local historical society in Georgetown. But the flags that you have to picture in the fort were the Union flag, which of course was shown in the Romer view early on, but later the colonial red ensign flag was used by British in America as the colonial flag. So you would see that over the fort in that period as well. Here we have the fort circa 1775, and what happened here was very interesting. They extended the fort. The parapets were extended all the way along the lower parade down to the entrance to the fort, and additional guns added all along here with the magazine buried in the embankment here. The old barracks may have remained because it was repaired in 1798 and moved. The upper magazine may have remained, but we know that a Frenchman, Dubuque, was the temporary engineer, a French engineer who replaced Gridley on a temporary basis in 1775 when he was wounded at Bunker Hill. And Dubuque was actually in Marblehead when the fort was planning to be rebuilt the same year, 1775. At any rate, you'll see that The earthworks on the upper left here were Bunker Hill were just thrown up hastily overnight and were mostly just earth and some gabions. But below it, you see a drawing probably by that French engineer Dubuque. It's a French redoubt on Winter Hill between Winter and Prospect Hills. But that was done in July of 1775, right when Washington appeared at Cambridge with his army. Here we have Muller's treatise on artillery. Many of these guns displayed, used at Marblehead. And then on the lower right, you get a British engineer, Chief Engineer Montresor, who did all of the fortifications for the British in Boston. Even before the Revolution, he did the fort in Boston Harbor, of which here you see a section of their redoubt on Bunker Hill. After the battle, the British fortified the real Bunker Hill, not Breed's Hill. But this gives you a sense of the scale of these earthworks that were all timber reinforced. And so they had little barracks behind them and platforms for shooting. But it's amazing the scale. He is holding Muller's field engineer from 1759, Montresor, in this Copley portrait. Now you get to see something Richard Gridley did. Richard Gridley lived a long time. He lived till 1796 and is buried in Canton. But this is a later portrait of him from the Canton Historical Society. Here you see his drawing of, actually it's Louisburg in 1745, but you can see all the embankments and terracing that is similar to what was done at Fort Sewall. So you get a sense of his ability of drawing. Over below here are the drawings that he did and sent to Washington with the help of another engineer, Captain Chadwick. These are minor forts around Boston, earthworks, and you can see the level of the drawing that would have been used at Marblehead. Those drawings, both from 1742 and the 1770s, are missing and presumed lost in the old State House fire, and perhaps even the later ones at the burning of Washington by the British in 1814. On the far left, you find the actual receipt of Gridley for the payment of his charge as chief engineer of the US Army. Here we have Marblehead Fort armament. And again, in the period of the Revolution, we have Old Nancy, which was a naval carriage mounted here. The drawing by Ed Desjardins of the actual gun barrel, that's the original. And then all the accoutrements that would be necessary that would have been in the fort to operate the cannons, as well as another here, a Paul Revere field base at Newport. They had both types of guns apparently at the fort, because in June of 1776, the committee to review the seacoasts from Boston to Newburyport looked at the state of defense and found in Marblehead the strength and beauty of their works are equally conspicuous. They have 18 pieces of artillery in their fort and 4 in one of their batteries, 2 24-pounders, 2 18-pounders, 2 14-pounders, 4 12, and the remainder 9 6s and 4s. So you can see it was a real dog's breakfast of combination of different artillery pieces. Now in the fort itself, in the barracks, and we find interesting comparables, even though they're gone at Marblehead. Williamsburg magazine is still extant, very not unlike the round powder houses up here. It's octagonal, but within it, you can see early examples of the type of gun racks that would have been used. And on the lower left here is a plan of the barracks at Fort William and Mary done by Henry Burbeck, or Walbeck, who was his assistant around 1791 to 1808. But this shows the barracks layout of the period of Marblehead's underground and later, earlier even barracks. They had actually not single beds, double bunk beds with 2 men to a bed times 2 levels. So there were like 8 men in each side of this bunk here and another double single bunk here. But between them, you see this number 11 were gun racks. And here on the right at Old Fort Niagara, you can see examples of these old timber bunk beds that would have been not comfortable, but maybe a step above slaves' quarters. Here we have at Marblehead Fort the detail of the 1860 view from Lossing, but it shows you the old barracks building, which I think was moved to the side when they built the later officers' quarters, and you'll see that when we get to 1794. Here we have a very interesting thing that happened in Marblehead in 1775. The Marblehead Fort grandees were recorded by Ashley Bowen, October 1st to 3rd, 1775. He reported, "'Tis said General Washington is in town." And I have yet to find Ashley Bowen wrong on any specific detail, but he was reporting on what was essentially secret story that Washington was on the shores visiting the shores about Chelsea, for which he billed the US government October 6th. So he was not in Cambridge with his troops. He was out looking at forts and things. So October 13th, Bowen reports again, "The grandees came to examine our fort again. General Lee, etc." Well, General Lee happened to be second in command to Washington. So he was there. Washington was probably there too. He was there examining their fleet that was being begun by Colonel Glover at the time. And here you see on the far left, lower left, the actual orders sent by Washington through his secretary, Joseph Reed, to Glover and all. And they were to perform their commissions regulated by the agreements made at Marblehead and Salem. So somehow James Nelson, who was from Beverly, missed this detail in his Washington's Secret Navy, which is a very good book, by the way, that I highly recommend. But somehow Marblehead and Salem are underlined in the original that I found online, that were the agreements for the fleet orders. Now we have another first for Marblehead, the Appeal to Heaven flag. Washington Secretary Reed again wrote to John Glover on October 20th that he thought, "What do you think of a flag with a white ground and a tree in the middle with the motto Appeal to Heaven," which was adopted as the first Navy flag. And you see an example on the left here of, this was a 19th century watercolor showing the Appeal to Heaven flag with some Marblehead, either widows or potential widows, supporting their troops. And here a great model of the Hannah of Colonel Glover that was named by his, after his widow, his wife, Hannah Devereaux. And you see the pine tree flag on that model. It was on the web at an exorbitant price. At any rate, sorry, we've got the Marblehead Fort flags during the Revolution. And you see you started with the red ensign or American colonial Queen Anne flag. They went to the Grand Union flag probably because on January 1st, 1777, Ashley Bowen reports, "This morning 3 cannon was fired at the fort and a flag of 13 stripes were hoisted at the fort." Well, that's his language, but the facts are pretty clear. At any rate, the Stars and Stripes wasn't adopted really until June 14th. So this was the early version of the flag, probably the Grand Union. And then down here, we have the 1777 flag, the Stars and Stripes adopted, known as the Hopkinson flag for the US Navy. So those would have been the flags of the Revolution at the fort. And on the far left, that detail of the what looks like the inn in Marblehead overlooking the harbor, you've got a warship firing a salute with the gentleman and his punch bowl and his ledger in the tavern. But we've got is a lot of salutes fired. They saluted the Hancock frigate that John Manley was piloting from Cape Ann. He gave 7 guns and our fort returned 5. So we got all kinds of details about the salutes they fired. Excuse me. Then finally on Monday, July 5th of 79, this day fair and pleasant, our gentry fired the cannon at the fort for independency, so Independence Day. Now another Marblehead first that I discovered apparently last night, the final word on that came through. Actually, Lafayette's Armament stopped at Marblehead on its way to Boston with news that the King of France and Admiral de Grasse were on their way with munitions and reinforcements for the Continental Army. And this was great news. That was the appeal to heaven being answered for Marblehead and the rest of the country. But the Armament was Lafayette's ship. It pulled in to Marblehead, probably under the guns of the fort. And according to the ship's log, the captain reported that John Glover came out to the ship to meet Lafayette. And then last night I found the French translation, which my wife Ellen helped me to get correct. The detail that Bob Selig put into the W3R Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route Study of Massachusetts, he found the original log. And it says that the captain of the Armament set sail for Boston on the early morning of the 28th, but he had to wait for Lafayette, who spent the night on land. And so he actually probably was at Colonel Glover's house at that point. Here you see him down here on the lower left when he met, Lafayette met Admiral de Grasse at Yorktown. That was on his flagship. But we had the Armament reproduction visit Boston in 2015, which was a great sight to see. And I have to give the Shirley Eustis House a little plug here because you'll see Governor Eustis greeted Lafayette at that house in Roxbury in 1824, but he also was connected to Marblehead Fort, you'll see in a little while. Peacetime at the fort was involved a lot with fishing, and on the far left here, you see the militia. This is Cornet, who lived at Richard Derby's house in Salem, drew a lot of little sketches and drawings of the locals, and this is one of the what looks like the militia at a tavern table with a long trestle table and bench, typical of what would have been in a fort at the time. And on the right, an angler who would have been catching fish in the area. And below that, you see as late as the 1850s, some of the fish flakes on the shore at Marblehead. And the importance of the codfish, obviously, to Marblehead was such that, and to the Commonwealth, that it adorned both the old and the new state houses. Here you see the sacred cod that's now on display in the Senate chamber at the new state house. Here we get to 1794, and here's where we see the old barracks here, still right outside the gun platform. But we see a new blockhouse that was being planned by Stephen Rochefontaine, another Frenchman who served as US engineer at the time in 1794. And you see he talks about the old parapet to remain. That was the one with the magazine in it that dated to the time of the Revolution. Here's the drawing itself from 1794. And you see, he planned a much smaller redoubt. He actually was going to bring the upper redoubt in a bit, and that necessitated moving the old barracks, but it was not destroyed because they rebuilt it and repaired it. Here is the blockhouse that was of brick. And you see a gate here down to get into the old magazine that's in the parapet that was kept. He says the dotted lines represent the old battery, which is left in the state as is in now to serve as a covered communication from the town to the fort. So that was the brick blockhouse was meant to house the officers, but also it was for the garrison to live in, and the magazine were below it, apparently. And the opening of the parapet we've mentioned. But he was waiting for approval from Governor Sam Adams to do the final plans. So we're not sure we've seen these. But what we had then was Bentley reporting in 1794 that Rochemontagne intends to remedy the complaints against forts in Barbette without embrasures by raising the parapet and elevating the guns upon high and new constructed carriages. Well, these Barbette carriages were first introduced to Boston in 1780. We've got a drawing from the archives, Mass Archives, that I traced, which shows you the earliest version of this. It had a pin at the front that served as a swivel and a tiller at the back. And you were able to take a naval cannon and use it like a swivel gun so that you could just rotate it and have much more mobility when you're aiming at moving targets like ships. And some of these actually still exist up in Nova Scotia. So you can see in 3 dimensions about what those look like. And you see the little track for the rotation of the gun. The little wheels ran on the track. So it's really quite an innovative thing. Bentley reported that they've proved their cannon and now remain dismounted 6 pieces, 3 of which are good. 2 42 pounders, apparently left from the Revolution. Those were from Boston. They had the trunnions broken off and were repaired and mounted at Marblehead. And then a 24 pounder, and there are 2 18 pounders and 1 9. So in 1798, there were still the guns from the Revolution in the fort. Now at 1800, Marblehead Fort becomes Fort Sewall. And we've got 1800 to 1814. He was the attorney and judge of the class of 1779. He at Harvard. He married Abigail Devereux of Salem in 1781. State legislator and congressman from Massachusetts. He was associate Massachusetts of the Supreme Court when Fort Sewall became known as Fort Sewall, but he became Chief Justice in 1814, but died shortly thereafter in Maine when he was on a circuit court. But that's Fort Sewall. Here we are in 1809 to 1814. The fort had been completed under engineers Louis Toussard and Henry Burbeck between 1798 and 1808. And those drawings are presumed lost probably at Washington in 1814. But the repairs in 1809 were done by Joseph G. Swift, and you'll meet him later. The best plan is from 1820 by Guillaume Tell Poussin. And this is all redesigned. But these are the guys that really pulled off the fort as it stands today. Here's Major Louis Toussard. He was a French engineer who worked for the Americans in the Revolution. He lost an arm at the siege of Rhode Island and trained not only Henry Burbeck, who was also trained by Gridley, but this General Joseph Gardner Swift, who reports that Toussard gave him a French set of drafting instruments, but not only that, he could draw really well, even with only 1 arm. And he specifically says that. The other interesting thing is he kept an amazing memoir, which you can see online, and it's extremely detailed, but not about Marblehead, except to say that Mr. Eustis at Boston, who is William Eustis, later governor of Massachusetts, had been appointed agent of fortifications. And he was the one he gave requisitions to be collected at the respective points. But it was determined to repair the Rochemontagne work at Marblehead and at Gloucester. So General Swift knew a lot about the fort, but he didn't say much. He did report, though, that Governor Eustis accompanied him on a tour of the forts of the Northeast with Henry Burbeck. And up on their way to Portsmouth, Eustis was wooing his bride-to-be, Carolyn Langdon, and Swift reports he left him there with her to continue on to Maine. But they ended up being married, Eustis and Carolyn Langdon. And then Swift reports his entire journey down to Washington with William Eustis later to go visit with Monroe and Madison in Washington. So it's extremely detailed if you're interested in that subject. The link is at at the lower right. Now we're into 1808 to 1820, and I've got another drawing by Poussin that shows you the blockhouse there on the left with the bomb-proof quarters now extant, and all these other little subsidiary outbuildings that are now gone. But here is an elevation of the barracks at Fort Constitution, built around the same time by the same engineers, Henry Burbeck and this guy Walbeck, who drew this plan and elevation. So you can kind of get the sense that this is what the drawings would have looked like for that one-story blockhouse and the bomb-proof quarters. But the plan in section shows you that the parapet of the fort was thickened up, and there were gun platforms that were terraced behind it. And you'll see these in some detail later. Here's the more detailed photo. This must be, it's also by Poussin, but probably a little later, because he shows a little addition to the blockhouse, and he shows the cupola on the blockhouse. And you see it here in section, the blockhouse with a little cupola and the bomb proofs. So the bomb proofs were just about as tall as the blockhouse. It was one story. And we've got these outbuildings, but he shows every timber in the gun platforms. So it's quite an amazing drawing, and cross sections through all of the parapets. Now we have the guys who ran the fort. Here in 1812 to 1820 is Captain John Bailey, a great portrait now at Abbott Hall that was put on display there. It was done in 1792, but he was during the War of 1812 captain of the fort. Now this painting is believed to be the one, or a copy of the one, from which the Lossing view of 1860 was done. And you see it much more clearly, the little gabled entrance on the one-story blockhouse with end chimneys and the cupola with its little top. And over here, I believe, is the relocated old barracks just outside the parade ground on the edge of the fort, not shown in the plan, but an old buried cannon that must have been one of the old ones from the Revolution, perhaps the damaged ones that's long since disappeared, probably used for scrap. This northeast view of Marblehead from Fort Sewall shows the other side of the fort with what are either a couple of little guardhouses or maybe heavy gate posts, but I trust they're little guardhouses at the entrance to the fort. At any rate, Stephen Ranney was the commander of the US troops at both Fort Sewall and Fort Pickering. And he had company commanders Alexander Pope and Daniel Freeman between 1800 and 1803. Here we have the map, and here he is 1750 to 1850, but you can see all the little forts along the shoreline. They were redoubts, little earthenworks. And then here we have Fort Sewall, and then Fort Bailey was on the other side of Little Harbor. And then they exercised over here by Naugus Head. So there's a lot of information about how they use the different sites. But here on this detail, you see Fort Sewall with the blockhouse and the bomb proofs and these little other buildings that were furnaces for hot shot. They had two of them, one in each parade, and they were to set ships on fire. You didn't want to get a hot shot into your magazine if you were in a ship. And then over here is Pittman and Brown. They were building contractors who owned the future site of the addition to the fort made in the Civil War. And over here you can see Fort Bailey actually had quite a fort-like form, which seems to have disappeared, but it's now a park you can visit to see the site of it. Here again is you can't read all of this, don't expect to. This is actually the little one-story officers' quarters, and there were apparently two buildings like it at Fort Pickering. And then here the distant view of Fort Sewell. But what's interesting is that Lossing talks all about in this view, the entrance to the fort with the back to the harbor seen with a row of bomb-proof casements with arched windows and doors. And you'll notice that all 3 compartments of that bomb-proof had arched windows and doors. These you'll see were closed up on the right later. But above them is seen the officers' quarters built of brick in which Mrs. Maria T. Perkins resided. And she in it had a carpet made from uniforms of her father, Sergeant Stephen Twist, which Judy thinks is Twisden, of the Continental Army, and her 2 brothers worn by them during the War of 1812. So the fort was quite an interesting place to visit. Here's the important part of the fort's part in the War of 1812, when it saved the US Constitution with its deterrent power. Even if it didn't fire a lot of guns, the Constitution came in under its guns and was prevented from destruction by 2 British frigates with superior speed and firepower, the Tenedos and the anyway, they were actually deterred from coming into the fort because they didn't have pilots. A pilot came out to the Constitution, a local pilot, and brought the ship in. That's the first painting, actually, of the Constitution done by Cornet around 1803. And on the right is the actual first photograph of the Constitution under repair in Portsmouth. And then, just for interest's sake, the timber didn't all come from the South. People talk about the live oak in the Constitution. A lot of the oak came from West Rowley, now Georgetown, right on the hill behind our house here. It's even on the town's seal for Georgetown, formerly West Rowley. Fort Sewell's armament again in 1812 to 14. Here's a photo of a coast artillery battery, but you see the low stone inner parapet walls that these guns were mounted. They were ship's cannons. Here at the lower left, you see another one of those traversing carriages that were used up in Nova Scotia, where they still survive, probably also used at Fort Sewell. Here's a cannon from the Constitution. You can go see at Rockport, similar to what would have been at the fort, and another later Spanish-American War cannon brought from Havana by Marblehead residents anyway, that was stored in the Marblehead gun house, built in 1810 to help provide a storage place for artillery further away from the fort, which was a little more vulnerable. Here we have the complement of the fort. The census of 1810 records 47 enlisted men and 3 older people that were probably the officers and possibly the wife of the commander. Fort Sewell included these United States soldiers at Fort Sewell under command of Captain Stephen Ranney. So he was the captain at the time. And here we see the old magazine in the center here with a Gothic vaulted arch. And on the right, the bomb-proof quarters. And at the far left, you see that a zeroed in view of that distant view with the treeless landscape, but also what may have been the old barracks moved again to the entrance of the fort, where it's shown on plans of the period with a little outhouse behind it. And you see again, the distant underground bunkers. Here again, the section during the Civil War shows the actual fort. Now, if I'm overstaying my welcome, I can stop. If anybody wants to free up the time, please let me know by phone or whatever. I will keep going until I hear from you by phone. At any rate, Civil War, the fort was almost doubled in size with underground timber bomb proofs over here and a wooden timber magazine here to increase the capacity of the fort. But it was actually a section through these earlier constructions that remained. The blockhouse disappeared. And you've got the actual plan, and you can see they show embrasures here for cannons, but you can count the guns. There are a dozen guns at the time with the underground bunkers and the magazines, and the barracks shown over here with the undergrounds here. And this is the entire upper western part of the fort that's disappeared since. Now we have all the armament, and you can see how the barbette guns evolved here on the lower left, heavy seacoast weapons. They were swiveling the same way, but they were rearranged a bit, the carriages. But you can see over here at Fort Temporary Earthworks at Fort Brady, Connecticut Artillery, using reinforced wooden earthworks where the embrasures were made with these gabions and sandbags and things. So they were temporary structures, and you see all kinds of different guns. There were field guns, and there were seacoast weapons and field artillery. Here you can see an underground magazine similar to the one at Fort Sewall, with these gabions filled with earth temporarily in log roof structure. So it's exactly like what would have been at Fort Sewall. Now, finally here you get to the Spanish-American War in 1898, and we got some great shots. This one is from Fort Bailey on the upper left, shows the fort from a distance with the 1860s parapets still extant. And down here, you can see where they closed up two of the arches to make this part into an enlarged magazine for the bomb proofs. Here we have the guys marching past those old fish houses that you see here in the distance. This is one near the entrance to the fort. And below, a little kid with what looks like a Civil War musket, which is actually probably an Allen conversion trapdoor musket used during the Spanish-American War, with an artillery company hat on with the cross cannons. And here, the 1898 cannon that you see there. Again, these are just atmosphere for you from the Marblehead Museum. You can see the fort in the background of these becomes a tourist attraction. And you can see the sailboats sailing by the fort here in the early circa 1900, and then that distant view repeated again, soon to change. Now in the 20th century, we've got the aerial view showing you the extant fort as it is today, pretty much as it was in the 1820s. And then you've got the Fort Sewall Cafe and Fort in a 1900 postcard with all the dories and the sailboats, which became the yachting capital at the time. And then you see in 1910, they added a little bit of public facilities here. And we have Glover's reenactor regiment here drilling at the fort circa 1976, as well as here John Glover's house, still extant and privately owned. But that's the way it stands today. Here are acknowledgements, which I've already given you at the beginning. If we didn't lose too many people, I'm sorry if I overstayed my welcome. But that concludes the talk for today. And I thank you for your attention. And if we have time, I'll try to answer some questions.
Thank you. We did have a question in the chat.
Okay, let me get to the chat. I got to pull this stuff down here.
And folks, feel free to add any questions you might have to the chat.
Right. For some reason, I've lost you. I'm going to get your Zoom back here. There. Okay. Somehow I seem to have.
Do you want me to read the question to you?
Yeah, could you read it to me? Just because I seem to have lost the.
Yeah, no problem. The question is, was there any particular reason for making, oh, I just lost it, for making a powderhouse round instead of square?
I think, believe it or not, it goes back to the original powderhouse of the Commonwealth, or now the Commonwealth, then the province of Massachusetts. In 1741, it was a windmill. So it was originally a French Huguenot who built the windmill out of stone. I've seen one in operation in France that's just like it. And then in 1741, Shirley bought it and converted it into a powderhouse. And at that time, apparently they built the brick vault over the top and put the roof on that, but it no longer served as a windmill at the time. But it seems to have carried over to Marblehead. It would have been stronger than a rectangular building. That's another good reason to use it that way.
Oh, interesting. Also, they're curious as to how difficult it was to aim a cannon.
It was difficult. That's why they invented that traversing carriage in the 1780s. It was actually invented in France a little earlier, but it was due to the French that they brought the technology here right at the late Revolution when they were still here in 1780. The French were exhibiting it down in Boston, and then presumably it was used in Marblehead eventually because they used it right through the War of 1812, those seacoast cannons that were called traversing carriages.
Next question is, when did the fort cease being an official US military?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have included that. It took an intermission after the Civil War, but was reactivated during the 1898 period. And that's beyond my scope, actually. I was researching the period of the colonial and the Revolution fort. And like eating potato chips, I couldn't stop and continued on through the 20th century. So that's all in the timeline and the details we have in the timeline. But it was at the end of the 19th century when the fort was deactivated, and the turn of the century when it got. That's my timer going off telling me to stop.
Well, we do have a couple more questions.
Good.
if
I'm
you don't mind.
fine with that.
Okay, good. Andrea asks, she says, I had never heard of Fort Bailey. Do you know if it was named for the commander of Fort Sewall?
Yes, apparently so. And they also, it was a point there, I think. Peach's Point was out a little further, but Bailey probably commanded both forts. And it was also known as Fort Washington for a while. So that's another interesting tidbit.
Great. Going back to the round powder houses, Eric mentions in the chat that perhaps the shape of the powder house is circular, with the thought of possibly that in the event of an explosion, the circular shape would funnel the explosion upwards rather than outwards.
Well, it might, except that there was a brick vault on top. But in general, the strength of the thing was such that it was a lot stronger than any rectangular building. As anybody who's ever, seen a tube, tubular type structure, they are stronger.
Great. And we have many thanks in the chat for the wonderful presentation, which I will second that as well. Thank you, Rick, for your presentation and all your research. We appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry for a few of the technical glitches, but that happens. We're amazing that we could all get online and witness it all. Pretty amazing technology.
Absolutely. So thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody. We'll say goodbye for tonight, and I hope you can join us again at our next lecture and presentation. You can find more at marbleheadmuseum.org in upcoming programs. Thank you and have a great night.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.